Conversations with Nicole. Conversations with Nicole. Let's talk about it. Tell me all about it. I'm here. I want to know what's on your mind. Ooh, the world needs to hear from you, and I'm so glad to have a conversation to reach the nation. And it's all about you. We'll help each other to discover innovative ways to positively change the world. Let's talk about, let's talk about, yeah. Let's talk about conversations with Nicole.
Greetings. Welcome to Conversations with Nicole. I am Nicole Everett, your host. And Conversations with Nicole is a talk show based in Tallahassee, Florida, focused on connecting the community through conversations. And today is what I call Wellness Wednesday. Wellness Wednesday is an opportunity for you, me, and my guests to have an interactive conversation about whatever it is we want to talk about. And so today, we are talking about Black men and mass incarceration. Black men and mass incarceration. June is Men's Health Month, and we have been focusing on Black men and their mental health. So today's guest is no stranger to Conversations with Nicole. Dr. Karla was on last month, and we said we wanted her to come back. And so she treats a unique population. And so I have heard some stories from her that will bring a tear to your eye. But, she is very passionate about this work. And so I thought, who better to come on than Dr. Karla to talk about Black men and mass incarceration. So before I introduce her and bring her on the screen, on the stage with me, I want to hear from you all. Again, this is interactive. We are live on Facebook, on YouTube, and on Greater Works Network. So if you will, in the comments, let us know where you tuning in from. I see you, Ozzy Oz. Ozzy will be our guest on Monday. Ozzy is tuning in from Virginia Beach. Hey there, Miss Vanessa. Thank you. Love your theme song. I love it too, girl. I think it could be a hit. We just need one more verse and it could be a hit record on the radio. Thank you for tuning in. Vanessa's in Tallahassee, and Miss Lisa Love. Hey there, Lisa. Lisa's also in Tally. So tag somebody, let them know they need to be here. Please like, comment, share, and let folks know we're about to get this conversation going. It was a hot one in Tallahassee today in more ways than one. Hot in terms of the actual climate, but hot because of some of the news stories that have broken here today. So y'all just, watch and pray. That's all I'm going to say. Watch and pray. So as others are logging on, we are going to go ahead and introduce Dr. Karla L. Sapp is a nationally certified counselor, a certified clinical mental health counselor, a master addiction counselor, a certified professional counselor supervisor, a licensed professional counselor in Georgia, an approved clinical supervisor, and a licensed mental health counselor in Florida. So she got all the alphabets. Very, very accomplished. She earned her doctorate of education and counseling psychology from Argosy University in 2014, and she is also a graduate of Armstrong Atlantic State University, where she got a BS in criminal justice, and South University, Savannah. She has been practicing for 14 years, specializing in mental health and addiction counseling with the following settings: inpatient acute hospitalization, outpatient drug court, and is currently a drug abuse program coordinator and previously a drug treatment specialist with the Federal Bureau of Prisons, where she works with incarcerated male offenders, as well as was the former Southeast Regional Legislative Coordinator for the Council of Prison Locals 33. She also has worked with military populations while providing services within the inpatient setting, as well as juvenile offenders as a juvenile probation parole specialist too, with the Georgia Department of Justice. She is the owner of Project Hope of Coastal Georgia. She also previously served as an adjunct psychology professor at Georgia Southern University. And she was awarded the Black Mental Health Symposium 2020 Mental Health Advocate of the Year. She currently presents workshops and speaks in global, national, regional, state, and local level at several conferences and events throughout the year. So help me welcome Dr. Karla Sapp. Yay!
Hello. Hi.
How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Doing well. Thank you.
Good.
Thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. My pleasure. So tell the people who may not have been on here last month, who is Dr. Karla? Not what you do, but who is Dr. Karla?
I always like to tell people I am just a little geeky gal from the coast of Georgia, down there in little old Midway, Georgia, which kind of sits nestled in between Savannah, Georgia, and Brunswick, Georgia. Born and raised, I am an advocate. I am a counselor. I am a friend, but more importantly, I am a daughter. I am a mother, and I am a grandmother who is passionate about all things mental health.
Love it. And you look way too young to be a grandmother.
Oh, I'm loving it though. I'm loving grandmotherhood.
That's wonderful.
Yes, I'm loving it.
Yes, the ability to leave them, love them and leave them.
Exactly. Sometimes it's hard though. It's hard. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I'm like, oh, I need some more time with y'all. Then there's those moments where I'm like, ooh, I'm so glad that it's only a few moments that I can spend.
Indeed. Yes, ma'am. All right. So Ozzy said it's time for Dr. Karla to run for public office in DC. Right.
Ooh, Ozzy, that's a big one. I've had plenty of people in the course of the last 4 years who have prophesized that.
Really?
And it's been said several times over.
Wow.
As recent as last week, I was actually having a meeting with someone from FSU here in Tallahassee, and literally had somebody was like, "So when are you running?" And I was like, "Nope." I always tell people, as much as I love it and I love the work, the reality of it is I don't want to be pigeonholed and not be able to do what it is I'm passionate about. Indeed. Or feel that I have to navigate. I've had plenty of success doing advocacy work and public policy work, but I see where I am more free to do what I love to do on this side versus being in the inner circle of Capitol Hill. So
I understand. Trust me, I do. I get those questions from time to time as well. It's like anybody sees any inkling of leadership skills in you, they think you ought to run for some public office.
Yes, but I appreciate it, Ozzy. Like that's like one of the biggest compliments anybody could ever give me. And so every time I'm asked that question or that compliment said, it's something that truly humbles me. But I think I make a difference on this side. I can make a bigger difference on this side than I can inside of the inner circle of Capitol Hill.
Indeed. Speaking of making a difference, so tell us a little bit about what you do on a daily.
Ooh, honey, if somebody would have told me 121 months ago that I would be going to prison to serve a 240-month sentence, I would have been like, never, not me. But I am on the downside of that 240-month sentence, so I am super excited about that. So I always tell people that to kind of start off, because that's how I tell people that, next month will be 11 years that I made the decision to leave my job at drug court and enter into the federal prison system as a drug treatment specialist. And so I've been working with the incarcerated male population inside the federal system now since July of 2011, providing substance abuse treatment as well as mental health treatment, because they go hand in hand. And so that's what I do on a day-to-day basis, Monday through Friday. I've worked at 2 different institutions now, one in Georgia, and now I'm here in Florida working at an institution where I actually coordinate the entire drug programming for my institution. But then I've also worked with the I've also worked with the offender population throughout the course of my time being in my career, starting back in 2004, when I started with juvenile probation. And it was actually in juvenile probation that I realized that I needed to do something different. And it goes back to a story I always tell people. Back in 2007, 3 young gentlemen, one was 12, one was 13, one was 14, in the state of Georgia, kidnapped a grandmother and her 3 grandbabies. It was part of their gang initiation. And I happened to be on call that weekend, got the call, and, was trying to navigate everything with the police department there where I was at that time in Georgia. Mm-hmm. And was kind of helping them understand, the 13 and the 14-year-old, their charges had to go through the state system because of their age, and based on the offenses, they actually had to go into superior court. The 12-year-old had to go through juvenile court, but kind of helping them to understand how the code sections were written. Mm-hmm. And the 12-year-old, at the time, his parents were military. Mom was cross seas. Dad was here. They were frantic, didn't know what was going on. So I'm trying to help them navigate it as well as try to, support the 2 families whose kids were in superior court. The 12-year-old ended up doing 30 months in a juvenile detention facility. And that was a lot of work. That was the first time I ever was involved in any type of advocacy initiative. Because the judge literally was just like, I can lock him up for 5 years. And I was like, you could, but I'm not recommending that. He's 12, he was 12 at the time. He's 13 now when he's in court. That's not my recommendation. I feel like he would be best served, if he did this particular amount of time, come home, still have a chance to attend high school, be able to be a productive citizen, things of that nature. Judge didn't really like me, but I had the law, on my side. So I used it to my advantage. Mm-hmm. But I tried to do the same thing for the 13 and the 14-year-old when they went to court. By that time, they were 14 and 15 by the time they went to court. Tried to do the same thing, went to superior court. Wasn't necessarily something I had to do because they were in superior court, but they were kids, they were babies. And I was just like, I can't send babies to prison. Yet the judge didn't see it that way. I kind of tried to talk to the judge and the public defenders and the DA and was like, look, go ahead and convict them in adult court, send their adjudication back to juvenile justice. Let me adjudicate them under the juvenile law 5 years. They'll still be able to come home early 20s and have a life, Judge was like, no. One of them, the 14-year-old at the time, was sentenced to 20 years with 10 to serve. The 15-year-old was sentenced to 30 years with 20 to serve. The 14-year-old at that time he got out in 2017. The 15-year-old is still serving time. It was on that day that I realized I wasn't cut out for that kind of work. I did not go to school to send babies to prison. Mm-hmm. And it broke my heart. At that time, 12-year-old, he's like my adopted child. We still talk. His family's really close with me. Mm-hmm. But I realized then that I had to do something different. And that's what kind of led me to getting my degree in counseling and then getting my doctorate in counseling psychology. Because for me, it's if I'm going to make a difference, and I need to know that I'm actually in a position to make a difference and not be a part of the issue or contribute to the bigger issue of mass incarceration. I want to be able to kind of curtail it. I want to be able to be a positive influence and try to bring light to mass incarceration, but at the same time, work with these individuals and try to make them whole, because a lot of them are just broken. Yeah. And that's the sad part, is people don't recognize their brokenness.
Yeah, you said quite a lot there. So I'll tell you, for me, oftentimes when I see, on the news, these stories about Black males in particular, and these are young men, oftentimes that are, have committed some crime. Mm-hmm. I see little boys. I see little broken boys that have, it's either a need was not met or something happened. Mm-hmm. Or things happen. And so yes. I think, part of this conversation definitely needs to be about, what goes on that gets them to this place. I mean, I did a little bit of research before we came on, and you know, it's estimated that almost 40% of the male incarcerated population is Black,
Mm-hmm.
yet make up about 13% of the, national population.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's a high number.
Very high number. And a lot of times people, sometimes people think, well, you look at the statistics on these websites and it's like, oh, well, there's way more other races that, excuse me, are incarcerated versus Black men. And while that is true, when you look at just population wide, when you think about the fact that Black men are already a minority. And so because we're, African Americans are minorities, period, but then Black men are even more of a minority.
Right.
When you have the majority of that minority incarcerated, whether it be a state prison or a federal prison, it's disproportionate. In the criminal justice system, it completely it completely just annihilates to some degree Black men and their identity and who they are, and it's an oppressive system. I mean, and let's just call it what it is. It was designed to be an oppressive system. It was designed to make individuals dependent upon these resources that they're providing. You always hear these little jokes about the three hots and a hot, three hots and a cot, and then have all these other, recreation and medical and all these other amenities that, become to some degree attractive, and they don't have to really do a lot. And so it kind of gets to a place where you start to see where it's a cycle, and it's a cycle that isn't just starting with today's generation. It's a cycle that goes back generations before them, and every generation has just found themselves in this situation. And that's the sad part, is that at some point we have to get to a place where we're breaking this cycle, and it's going to take not just the work of mental health professionals. It's not going to take the work of, just individuals who are working within the system. It's going to take the constituents, the community members. It's going to take politicians. It's going to take everybody playing a part, being able to discuss these issues that are so relevant, because Black men face a lot in this world. From adverse childhood experiences to I feel like people don't pay attention to a lot of time is school to prison pipeline. Like, let's just go back to the 90s with the school, and not even before the 90s. Let's go back to the 80s with the crack, the crack epidemic, right? And how that kind of fostered a lot of our Black men starting to be pushed into the prison system. And even that, when you think about it, when you look at how the criminal justice system has worked with that, like, we've had to go back and reform a lot of those laws within the last 10 years, 11 years or so, because it was completely against Black men. And so when you have that epidemic taking place, where a lot of Black men are now being incarcerated, then you turn around and you got the school to prison pipeline that comes out in the 90s. And not only the school to prison pipeline, but then you also have, I always tell people, sometimes we fail to realize most kids in the 90s was on Ritalin. Like, everybody, Ritalin, ADHD and ADD was the thing now, and so everybody was on Ritalin or either Adderall or either Vyvanse. Well, here's the kicker with all three of those. While, yes, they are utilized for mental health purposes, all three of them are stimulants, which means you're pretty much feeding kids beginning at the age, sometimes 5, 6 years old, you're giving them crack cocaine and methamphetamine in a pill form. Like, that's just what it is. So here it is, we're already feeding them, we're already making them dependent on substances, but then we're quick to say, oh, well, marijuana was the gateway to all these other things. And it's like, no, our physicians in our schools and our teachers who were saying that little Johnny is just horrible in class and he won't sit still. And instead of them challenging him academically, we want to push him into, ISS, or we want to give him this label of being this bad kid. Now he's on these medications, Ritalin, and now we pretty much have already started his pathway to substance use at such a young age. That's what happened. So you have that we're contending with in the 90s when everybody started going on Adderall and Ritalin. And so then we talk about that. Let's talk about brain structure. Brain development stops at this point because that impacts their neurological functioning. It impacts how their brain is developing. On top of most of our African American men are living in homes that are in poverty. They're living in homes that are one-parent homes. We're living in homes where our parents are just as addicted to substance use, involved in criminal behavior. And what do? We have to learn how to survive because we surely can't thrive in that type of environment. So we have these adverse childhood experiences. And people think trauma, a lot of times when they think trauma, they think the classic trauma, right? You're talking car accidents, natural disasters, fires. But let's talk about the environment that I'm living in and the police being in that environment every night. Me seeing blue lights, me having to wonder if my house is safe or if my house is going to be broken into, me wondering if my parents are going to come home or not, or if I'm going to have food on the table so that I can eat. So my basic needs aren't being met. And so if my basic needs, housing, food, clothing aren't being met, of course, I'm not going to feel safe. And if I'm not feeling safe, I'm not really going to feel like I'm loved and I'm belonging. What am I going to do? I'm going to go seek that out. I'm going to seek it out from whatever source I can seek that out from. So a lot of these kids, especially our Black men, end up in the streets. And they end up in the streets because they're seeking some type of validation that they're not getting in their homes. And or we've got to make a way because mama's working 3 and 4 jobs. We barely see her. I'm the man of the house. I got to do what I got to do. And this is the thought process that you hear consistently, right? It's all the time. Like, I've got to do I had to do what I had to do. And so they continue to live this life. And by the time they're 18, 19, 20, guess what? They've committed so many offenses to the Fed system's knocking on their door. Now the Fed system, because the Fed system is the Fed system, what we gonna do? We're gonna lock them up for 120 months, 160 months, 240 months. Right. We just taken their entire life and put them kind of in this little cage and said, all right, here, learn how to survive even more. But in your survival, become dependent on us, not thinking about the fact that they gotta go home at some point. Like, how are they gonna go home when you've made them dependent on a system that truly wasn't never meant for them to actually come into and truly be rehabilitated? The prison system was designed to be punitive. It wasn't designed to be rehabilitative. So now we're in this quandary where we got people going home. We have our Black men are coming home and they have limited resources because they're considered violent criminals. They're considered the worst of the worst. No job wants to hire them. They don't have any means. A lot of their families passed away, or they have families who are also now a part of the criminal behavior. And so what happens? They go right back out there, same thing. And then they're back in the same situation again. So it's a never ending cycle that becomes exhausting. And so, when you have those who are passionate about the work, it's like, look, you got to be able to speak up. You got to be able to highlight that mass incarceration of Black men don't just impact the Black men who are in prison. Mass incarceration of Black men are impacting Black kids, Black boys, Black girls, Black parents, Black mamas, Black daddies, Black aunties, Black uncles, Black sisters, everybody's impacted because it ultimately breaks down our family structure, our family dynamics. And we as a culture, we as a race, we as an individual as individuals who are a part of an ethnicity have to begin to take more of a collectivistic mindset and understand that we got to take care of our community because nobody else is going to take care of our community. And it starts at home with us, but it also starts with us being able to highlight these issues so that others also understand what's going on too.
Ooh. Yes, to all of that. A lot of that, all of that. Warren Cave is with us. Hey, Warren, is in Tallahassee, and Warren is a returning citizen. He's actually, doing some work in the community. So he says a lot of this also comes from us not having leaders to speak up against the laws and statutes that have been built to take our power and not empower us. I
Mhm.
live in that cycle, and now I'm passionate with a ministry that's making a difference.
And I agree with Warren wholeheartedly.
Mhm.
I had the opportunity to back in 2018. I had the opportunity to work on the First Step Act,
Mhm.
which was very eye opening. One of my first actual kind of involvements as a legislative coordinator. And when I tell you it was the most fulfilling work that I've done, because I was on Capitol Hill in DC working it. Like, let me tell y'all about what's going on, right? And
Mhm.
some of the offices you go in, they have this distorted perception of the offender population. And they're
Mhm.
just like, oh, well, this is why they're there. And I'm like, well, let me help you understand this. Let me help you understand that. And so then you break these things down to them, and they're like, so it could have been me. And I'm like, you do realize everybody thinks criminally at some point in time. There's no perfect person, and we're all just one bad mistake away from being in that same situation. Like, let's
Mhm.
just call it what it is.
Right.
And so the day that that bill passed was probably one of the happiest days of my life,
Mm.
and it reminded me of why I did the work. And it was so funny because then my inmates at the institution that I was working at that time, like, they put it out like, oh, she gonna take over that program, and I was like, no, I'm not. I'm really not. Like, don't tell nobody. So it's like everybody knew that I'd worked on it. But even in that, like, it's still disappointing because here we are 4 years later, almost, since that bill's passed, and
Mhm.
we still haven't gotten that part right. So the
Mhm.
rehabilitation part still isn't working. And then there's legislation out right now, the Clean Slate Act, that I'm kind of going through, that's in the House and in the Senate, in DC, that I feel like is completely discriminatory,
Mhm.
because it takes nonviolent offenders and violent offenders, and it says if you're a violent offender, then this doesn't apply to you. But if you're a nonviolent offender, then we'll try to break down some of the barriers that would impact you reintegrating into society. And so
Mhm.
then it becomes a thing of, so are not all offenders worthy of reintegrating into society in a positive manner? So it's like,
Mhm.
it's still discriminatory, it's still exclusionary.
Mhm.
And to me, those are the issues that a lot of times we don't face and we don't think about. Like, how are these laws? Criminal justice reform is not authentically criminal justice reform. It's a buzzword. It's a word that kind of the politicians are using right now because, oh, it gets people thinking that we're really doing something, when at the end of the day, there's nothing meaningful truly happening. Because if there was meaningful change taking place, then we would have the programming necessary. We
Mhm.
would have the quality level of providers in and outside of the prison setting, in the communities. We would have the resources available in the communities for them to be able to utilize in a way that's not discriminatory based on what their offense may have been when they were 20 years old. And
Mhm.
now they're 37, 38, getting out of prison because you sentenced them to 135 months in prison, but you expect them to come home and be a productive citizen with nothing.
Yeah, and so um, that's challenging in and of itself because if you're talking about somebody that went in at 20 and comes out at 38, it's 18 years.
Mm-hmm,
How much has changed?
mm-hmm,
I have a friend that returned home. It's been about 2 years now, and he's been really just kind of struggling, just trying to navigate,
mm-hmm,
because he had been in for about ooh, maybe about 15 years, and then there was like a couple of years where he was out, but then prior to that he was in. And so like this whole internet piece has just been interesting, quite the learning curve,
mm-hmm.
needless to say, and understanding these phones and all of this stuff. And it's like, okay, I'm trying to just like get all 10 toes down to like under see what's going on around me. But you know everybody every day is talking about Facebook and YouTube and Twitter and all of these things, and it's like a big question mark for him. Like, what is this that you're talking about?
Listen, I had at my previous institution, I actually had an inmate who had a life sentence.
Hmm.
And under President Obama's administration, there was a lot of clemencies that was handed out and commutations. And so this particular inmate went from having a life sentence
Hmm.
to being told, if you do the drug program, you enroll in the drug program, then you can go home. Now imagine you've done almost 20 years. You've expected to never see the other side of that fence. And then
Hmm.
you get told one day, hey, you go take a drug program, you can go home. Completely life changing. Because in his mind, when I go home, I'm going home in a box. I'm not going home on my own free will, right? So he comes into the drug program, and I at that particular group, I had a lot of them were clemency guys, and they were clemency guys who had done an extensive amount of time in prison, whether it be that they had life sentences or just very long sentences. A lot of them, that whole group was pretty much just a clemency group. And so hey, when they finally got to my group, I was like, I got to do some practical living stuff with these guys. These guys got to be prepared to go home. I started talking to them about the fact that I could crank my car up from a little key fob, and they looked at me like,
Hmm.
cars crank up by themselves. Then when I told them, I said, well, my cell phone kind of tells me the traffic. When I get in my car every day, my cell phone tells me what the traffic looks like. And they were like, but how? And I'm like, because it's a smartphone. I was like, and everything, what I do, it's kind of being tracked with the phone. They were looking at me like, lady, you crazy.
Hmm.
And it did not help that I told them that you could now check yourself out at Walmart. They were just like, that's not the life we led. And so it's like people don't even realize that part. Like some of them, their kids have grown up,
Hmm.
and they're still like, oh, my baby, when I get home. And I'm like, that's not a baby no more. Like, let's just call it like, and it's sad because I have to do reality checks sometimes, and they don't want to hear it. And it's like, you have to remember that they've grown up the same way all this time has passed. They've grown up, and while you want them to be your baby,
Hmm.
they're always going to be your baby. But these are grown women and men that like they've got their own lives, and you've got to figure out how do you even become a part of that life out there and not go home expecting to have a little baby that you're going to rock in your hands. Like
Yeah.
that's the reality.
Hmm.
Life keeps going. Life outside that fence continues to happen every single day.
Absolutely. So let me pause right here. And for those of you who are just joining us, I have Dr. Karla Sapp, who is based here in Tallahassee, but she is what do we call you? A psychotherapist.
Yes,
Yes,
we'll go with
psychotherapist.
that.
Yes, in a Florida prison, and she specializes in substance abuse and mental health, mental wellness for offenders, incarcerees. And so, who better than Dr. Karla to talk about Black men and mass incarceration? And this has been quite the robust conversation. I want to pause also and just bring attention to Rashonda's comment. She said, I believe prevention and intervention programs that educate, stimulate, and provide positive outlets for young males creatively sculpt and genuinely build upon their natural gifts and talents, which
Hmm.
I agree wholeheartedly. She said, I also said, I understand there's more that goes into it, but the goals are to help assist in the molding. Responsibility and accountability also play key parts, which is
Hmm.
absolutely true. Javon said something. She said, keeping in mind also that they have quotas to keep beds full. It's about money, not rehabilitation.
Exactly. The prison system is probably the biggest money making scheme
Mm,
that there is. And I hate saying that considering, I feel bad saying that because I work in this system, right? But I'm not in this system because I'm trying to fill quotas. And I tell my offenders all the time, the money's great. I get paid a nice salary, but it's what I do on the out. It's what I do inside, and knowing that they're going home better men to their families and actually have the ability to stay home. That's what's so rewarding. And just last week, actually, one of my vendors came to me. I was in my office because my office is actually on the unit, and they have access to me. And so came to my office and was like, "Hey, do you remember this particular person?" Told me the name, and I was like, "I think I do, vaguely. I'm not for sure." And was like, "Yeah, I was talking to him on the phone, and he remembered you from your previous institution, and he was in one of your last groups before you left." And I was like, "I think I know this person." And so, I started doing some work, going through some of my old documentation that I have saved on my drive so that I could try to figure out exactly who it was, because I wanted to see a picture. But that particular former inmate of mine actually had told one of my offenders now, let me know, "Hey, I'm doing really good. Please tell her that I said thank you for everything that she's done." And like, those are those moments that make me go, those moments that kind of motivate me to continue to go to work. Because I have more of those moments than most people would even probably imagine. And that's what makes me feel really good. I have a couple of guys from my previous institution who actually are at my institution that I'm at now. And they were so funny when they got there last year, because when I left my previous institution, nobody knew where I was going. I was really quiet about it as far as letting the population know. It's like, I don't want them knowing where I'm going. And so there was about 5 or 6 of them that actually came for my program. And they got off the bus, and I went and I did their intakes because I knew they were coming for my program. And as soon as they saw me, they were like, "This where you at?" Like, they were so excited. And I was like, "Okay." "We were all trying to figure out where you went. We knew you left." And I left right as COVID was starting. So it was really kind of a out the door kind of deal. Nobody really knew a whole lot. But you could tell, like, for them, it made a difference because I genuinely care. And I tell them that, like, I don't come to work just to get a paycheck. I come to work because there's lives outside of these gates that depend on the work that I do. Not just my family lives, but their family lives. And the reality of it is some of them are coming back to neighborhoods that either I live in, family members live in. And I want to make sure that they are in a good place, because if they're in a good place, then that means that community continues to thrive. And so it's the bigger picture for me. And I wish other people would be able to get to that place inside the prison system and say that. But the reality of it is I'm an anomaly, I feel like, a lot of times. And there's a couple of anomalies with me, but there's very few of us that are in the prison system because we genuinely want to make a difference. We genuinely want to see these guys go home better men and stay home and be able to be productive citizens and healthy for their kids. But that's what's rewarding for me.
So would you recommend counseling for family members of incarcerated Black men?
I sure would. Mm-hmm. Because the thing is it's not just them who are going through, right? The family members are just as impacted. When you think about the fact that, I can only imagine what it would be like when we're in the prison system, when we're locked down and family members can't call, or the offenders can't call their family members. So you don't know what's going on. You don't know if they're alive, breathing, what's happening. But those are those moments that get really, really hard. Day to day, having to go through this life, knowing that they're in this situation. And there's, the system, I always tell people from a systemic perspective, the family system is just as impacted by an individual being incarcerated. And the person coming home, even if they've been able to work on themselves, they've been able to have some sense of healing in their lives and be able to change their mindset, if the family system is still the same, then that person coming home into that family system is not going to do any different. Mm-hmm. So the entire system has to go through this whole change process as well. And so I'm really big on, as individuals receiving counseling, but also as a system going home, receiving family counseling together to be able to work through other issues that you may be experiencing, because it is a reintegration process. You think about someone leaving when their child is 2 and they're going home when their child is 18. You don't know that child. Mm-hmm. You're going home, child's like, "Hey, I'm over here doing this." And you're just like, "What? No. So, like you have to, like, there are things that you all have to work on dynamically, dynamic wise, as far as in the families, but also individually. So I think everyone should be receiving counseling because it helps make the unit whole.
Okay, thank you for that. So we have a question from Facebook user. How do you think that we can be more proactive in the public school system, i.e., prison pipeline to prison, so that so many Black men won't even make it into prison?
Become trauma informed educators.
Mm,
Trauma informed, and not just trauma informed, social justice informed. Um, Two aspects of education that I feel like is not as relevant and not as talked about as much. The same way that clinicians, whether you're social worker, psychologist, counselor, marriage and family therapist, same way we have to be trauma informed, educators must be trauma informed. Educators must also be social justice informed and understanding the oppressive systems and how to become more anti-oppressive. And so a big part of that is becoming culturally responsive, being able to not just be able to teach the student the information, but being able to take into consideration what the student may be experiencing outside of the school setting and how that's impacting them inside of the classroom. And how we don't continue as educators to perpetuate those particular traumas in the classroom. It's easy to see a child who's in class acting out, just saying, "Oh, he's bad," or "Oh, she's being bad," when the reality is a lot of times it's about behavior just because they need attention. They're not getting that attention at home, or they're hungry, or whatever the case may be. But being able to take that moment to take that step back and say, "Okay, what's going on with little Johnny? What are some things that may be impacting little Johnny, and how can I be of assistance in order to kind of reduce some of those distractions and those barriers for him or her so that she or he can be successful in my classroom, and not just in my classroom, but within the school setting." And so, I think if more schools, and even in higher education, if a lot of the programs became more trauma informed and social justice informed, I think we'd see a big difference, because that is what is so important right now, is how we approach working with our students in the school system, and not and every issue isn't always some issue that we need to report to the principal or write them up for referrals, or like, how do we handle those issues? I do the same thing just in the prison system. Like, there are days when I have some of my offenders who can get real disrespectful with their mouth, but then I have to remember, okay, one, what's going on? Did they get a phone call, or have they gotten that email that just completely want to ride for them? And because I'm the person who's here, and we have to work through it. We have to talk about it. I always tell people, if I'm secure in my being and I'm actually able to be calm, then I'm actually able to make more of a difference in this setting, because I'm actually able to demonstrate for them exactly how to have those conversations and not feel that they're not being heard, they're not being validated, they're not being, they're not being listened to, and that I am a safe space for them to be able to talk. And we have to cultivate those safe spaces. It's funny because I have some of my offenders, they'll come by my office some days and be like, "How you doing today, mama?" And I'm like, "I'm so not your mama." But for them, I've cultivated this space where they feel safe enough. They feel like they're getting some sense of nurturance that they've never really got into their lives, that helps them to truly open up and be vulnerable and want to work on things that they need to work on. And that's how we have to approach it in the school system too, is how do we cultivate classrooms and spaces where our students feel safe enough to truly be themselves and be vulnerable, and not feel that they're going to be chastised or labeled because of that.
absolutely. Wow. I mean, so thank you for that question, Facebook user, because yeah, that was great. Um, Rashonda said, I agree. Counseling and therapy services are tremendously a positive aspect for family coping, having balance and renewing mindsets, better, healthier choices and options.
Yes.
Yes. She also said positive referral resources per observation and evaluation helps direct for healthier solutions. And Vanessa also agrees about the safe places are also very important. And Javon, who is in Atlanta, said, we need to super clone you. I agree, Javon.
I don't know if the world could deal with a super clone of me. I don't know.
Well, maybe just the work you do in the prison system.
Maybe. Thank you. That's a compliment. Well received. Thank you. Definitely received.
Mm-hmm. So, wow. So, I mean, you've given us some directive there as it relates to being trauma informed and social justice informed, in order to try to help mitigate some of that. But I think, as Rashonda said, also resources, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I often hear folks that work with youth that are high risk, if you will, are challenged with, they can, be with the child during the day and, fix them up. They call it, one of my guests called it the Mr. Potato Head syndrome, where they, fix them up the way Mr. Potato Head is supposed to look, but they go home and they come back the next day. The eyes where the nose is supposed to be, the ears where the mouth is supposed to be, and so on and so forth. And so this is an everyday thing where they send them home and they come back and they're all discombobulated, and they fix them up again and send them back home. And so, that's part of that cycle, right? Because they have to deal with whatever is going on at home.
Exactly. Exactly. And for a lot of them, home is just tumultuous and chaotic. And again, it goes back to surviving, right? And that's the disheartening piece. And for some of the parents, they're only doing what they've seen be done in their environments previously. And so you kind of, that whole saying of you become a product of your environment, it's so true, that you do become a product of that environment. And so again, goes back to just the system as a whole. And like Rashonda said, having the referrals, having the resources available, and being able to understand that at this moment, I always hear, we have all these mentoring programs, right? And I always ask people when I hear about these mentoring programs, like, so what is the purpose of your mentoring program? If it's to make your organization look good, to give your organization, kind of some credibility, that's great. But are you truly vested in making a change? Is this something just to kind of make you a little bit better than the next organization, to kind of give you some leverage and some publicity? And understanding that true mentoring is downright nitty gritty and it's hard work. And that you've got to go into these areas and these environments that you may not necessarily be as comfortable being in. If somebody would have told me again, 11 years ago, if somebody would have told me that I was going to walk into a federal prison and I was going to start my career as someone working inside of a prison system, I would have been like, no, I'm not going there. Who goes to prison? Especially who volunteers to go to prison, right? Like nobody does that. But yet I've realized that, it's bigger than just me going to prison. That again, there are lives that depend on this work that I'm doing. And it's not just the lives of those who are in the situation, it's the lives of those who are out in the community waiting on them to come home. And so the ripple effect, right? And I always think about like the pebble, we were growing up, you went outside with the water pump and you threw the pebble in the water and you watched the ripple. That's the reality, right? And so trying to make sure that I'm able to be a positive ripple effect, and that even though I may not ever meet family members, indirectly I've had a positive influence on their lives. But then also being able to help others in the community know that it is a collective effort. We can have these conversations, but having these conversations do us no good if we're not putting forth the work that is necessary to make the difference. So that means developing programming that genuinely is about making change. going into those areas and those environments that you wouldn't necessarily go in, that you would kind of shun and stay away from, but understanding that it's those environments that you're needing to be in, educating yourself, connecting with resources in the community. If you see that there's a need and that, it's missing, being able to fill that need, being able to, someone said earlier, being able to utilize our own experiences in order to be able to help others understand exactly what's going on. I am my offender's biggest advocates. And yes, it puts me a lot of times in bad way with some of my coworkers because it's like, oh, she's a hugger thug. And it's like, no, I'm not a hugger thug. But I actually understand that basic humanity goes a long way. And at the end of the day, my offenders are still human beings. Just because they're in prison, it doesn't change the fact that they are human. And I want them to be able to have the same rights that everybody else is afforded. And their circumstance doesn't define them. And I tell my offenders this all the time, your circumstances don't define you. You define your circumstances. So how are we going to define that day? Because what we're not going to do, we're not going to keep living this life that we've been living because you're worth so much more. You're better than this. And so being able to speak positive and speak life into them is so important. And people don't realize that, but we've got to do as a race, as a culture, as a community, we've got to do better for ourselves because we've just become accustomed to, oh, that's just the way it is. No, it doesn't have to be that way. Just because this system was designed the way the system was designed don't mean that we have to go knocking on the system door like, let us in. How do we dismantle that system? By taking care of our own. We dismantle this oppressive system by making sure that we are providing the resources and the services in our community so that our kids growing up won't be knocking on that same door trying to get in because it's not where it's at. And they have this false perception of I get street cred if I go to prison. No, you get your life taken away from you. Let's just call it what it is.
Right.
120 months. I always say this when I talk to my offenders. I'm like, when the judge told you, and I use 120 months most times. I'm like, when the judge told you 120 months, you probably was like, oh, I can do 120 months. I said, and then you got back there to that holding cell and you remember basic multiplication. And in basic multiplication, you remember 12 times 1 was 12, which means that was 1 year. And that 12 times 2 was 24, and that was 2 years. And by the time you realize, wait a minute, 120 months ain't just a couple of days, but it's 10 years, you then start to realize, oh, I got to do something different. And a lot of them are like, yeah, we didn't think it was that bad until we really sat down and really thought about how many years it is. And I was like, yeah, because the system not going to tell you the years because they trying to make it sound a little better by telling you 120 months. That's 10 years of your life gone.
Okay. So you tickled me with the thugger hug, and you was tickled by it too. I've not heard that term before, but that's something that they say on the inside.
Oh, as mental health professionals on the inside, you are straight up hug a thug. Like that's like what they. Oh, she a hug a thug. She over there. And the thing is like, no, I'm not a hug a thug. I just, they're human beings, and I'm doing what's right. I'm not here to punish them. The judge already did that. I'm here to rehabilitate them. I'm here to get them better so they can go back home.
And that's exactly why you are here, Dr. Karla, because and really, y'all, I'm going to be honest with you. When I talked with Dr. Karla about coming back on to talk, I said, we're going to call it incarcerees are people too. But I thought that kind of sounded a little corny, but they are. And you definitely get to see the human side of them that, most of us probably don't get to see outside of their loved ones. So kudos to you for the work that you're doing. Javon had a question. She said, based on the work that you do inside the prison system, do you believe Florida will ever fix the system or at least make proper steps? Are you finding pushback on the work you do?
I'm gonna be honest with you. I don't think the prison system will ever, regardless of if it is state or fed, whether it's the state of Florida, state of Georgia, state of Alabama, whoever, or if it's, again, like I said, the Fed system, I don't think that there ever will be true reform, because true reform would actually means that there would be a reduction in the population, because true reform would come with programming initiatives that actually are geared towards rehabilitation, and being able to set up the offender population for success on the outside. And again, it's a system that was designed to be punitive. It's a system that's designed to make money. We talk about the cheap labor that kind of comes from the prison system. And it's not necessarily in their best interest to truly reform the system, because if they did that, they would be losing so much more. And that's the sad part, which is part of the whole private prison deal too. When you think about private prisons like Geo Group and Core Civic, those are the sad parts, because they've seen where it becomes a money-making scheme. And so it's, okay, how can I make money off of these individuals that are being sentenced into a system that is completely designed to oppress them, and to pretty much keep them where they are, make them dependent on us. Do I get pushback? Yes, I definitely get pushback. Does it get discouraging? It does. But at the same time, does it stop me from doing what I do? No. I probably get a lot louder. When I do get a lot of the pushback, that's when I probably get the loudest at times, and be like, oh, okay, so now you really gonna hear me and you really gonna be upset. And there are times when I do take a step back and I'm like, okay, you know what, I'm not gonna do a whole lot of talking about the offender population, just because I don't want to, bother or kind of disrupt the wave. But I've kind of gotten to this place in the last 4 years that I've been doing this work, that, I got to disrupt this wave. I've got to. The only way the system is going to be dismantled is if there's enough people who are willing to speak up about the system, and being willing to say, look, this system isn't working. And especially when you're there in it every day. And I'm not just like, oh, I'm there one day or two. I'm in the thick of it every single day. And so I know the ins, the outs. I know what they're needing, and we don't have it. And so, just that part in itself, and just seeing, knowing that these buzzwords get thrown around a lot of times. And it's like, okay, it's nice that you're saying criminal justice reform, but what does real criminal justice reform look like? It would look like a reduction in population, and we don't have a reduction in population. Mm-hmm. If the First Step Act actually had been implemented the way that it was designed to be implemented, trust me, there would have been over 60-something thousand inmates going home already, gone home. And that hasn't happened. So that tells me that even in all of that work that was done, there's still those individuals who are still just like, we can't afford to lose these amount of people, because then we lose money. And that's the sad part, is because you become a pawn in this game that shouldn't even be a game. It should be about restoration and rehabilitation.
Yeah. Oh, very, very good points. Thank you for sharing that. So Facebook user has another question about, what is your initial approach to helping a man who entered prison as a heterosexual male and is leaving the system after doing quote unquote bad time, as he can't face his son because of his lack of self-esteem?
So I think the first thing is I think that self-esteem piece is so important. Mm-hmm. And before we can even focus on the relationship with the son, got to focus on the relationship with yourself. Mm-hmm. And being able to get to a place where you are confident in yourself. And yes, the system is designed to tear you completely down. Mm-hmm. And so when the system is designed to tear you completely down, how do you rebuild yourself? And so being able to help you to help that individual identify a sense of purpose and meaning in their life, first and foremost, so important. Kind of going back, like a lot of times people kind of get the spirituality and the religious piece kind of mixed up, but spirituality comes down to meaning and purpose. And so what is your meaning and purpose? What, being able to kind of do this assessment of yourself, looking at all aspects of your life. How do you become healthy? How do you get to a place where you actually like you, working through the resentment that you may be harboring towards yourself, towards others. And so it comes down to doing a lot of work with yourself, work on yourself. And then from there, once we're able to restore and get you to a place where we're able to get you in a place where you're comfortable and you're feeling good about yourself, then work on those other relationships, because no relationship's going to be healthy if you're not healthy yourself. In your first healthy relationship, your most meaningful relationship, the relationship that is of priority, is the relationship that you have with yourself. How you feel about yourself is so important. And if I feel negative about myself, if I feel bad about myself, if I'm resenting myself, I'm going to project that out in everything else, in everything that I'm doing and onto everyone that I interact with. And so that's the first thing, is just doing that self-work. And that can be really messy. And I do it with guys. And trust me, I've had some guys sit in my office. I'm talking about some hardcore guys sit in my office and boo-hoo cry to the point where I'm ready to cry. Like, whew, okay, let's take a 5-minute break. Time out. I got to get myself together. But that's when the healing starting to work. But I think that's the key, is being able to get to a place where you realize, hey, you know what, I got to work on me. I've got to make myself whole. Because I'm not going to be able to have a healthy relationship with my son if I can't have a healthy relationship with myself, if I don't even know who I am, first of all. And all those kind of play into that. A lot of the baggage that we carry around, because, in childhood, this happened to me and I've never talked to anybody about this, or, I felt less than for this reason, or I was seeking validation here. My needs were, all these pieces play a part in who we become and how we interact with other people, how I interact with myself. And so we got to start with you.
No, very, very good points. Yeah. Wow. So we are just a little over an hour. And so this has been a great conversation. I want to give the viewers an opportunity to, any last question that you may have while we have Dr. Karla on the live. I'm going to give you an opportunity to do that. And if there are, we'll try to address them. But I do want to just mention from a recap standpoint, because y'all know I'm big on notes and I like some takeaways. So Dr. Karla talked about policy changes. She also mentioned being trauma informed and social justice informed, for there to be counseling for the loved ones of the incarceree, while they're away. And then once he returns, having family counseling. They all get together. You all get together and have family counseling. So those are some of the takeaways that I took from this conversation, which I think are really, really needed. All right. So Javon said, bring her back. Javon was the one, she said she wanted to clone you, super clone you.
Yes, I'm going to be super clone.
Yes.
I'm always willing to come back anytime that Nicole calls me. I'm here.
Absolutely. Well, we appreciate that. Well, hopefully this has been helpful for you all. If it was, if you let us know by putting some hearts or some thumbs up or liking. And let's keep this conversation going. So, Dr. Karla, I'm going to give you an opportunity to tell folks how they can connect with you.
Yeah, so if you want to connect, and I'm always open to connecting with anyone. I am on all social media platforms. I am on Facebook. It's under Dr. Karla, and Karla's with a K. It's my personal page. On Instagram, I am Dr. K_Sapp. And then on Twitter, Dr. KS or Dr. K-Sapp on Instagram. I have a website, www.drkarlasapp.com, and Karla is spelled with a K. And my email. You can email me through that site, but also my email is my name as well, Dr. Karla Sapp at gmail.com. And so I am always willing to reach out. From the last show, I've had a few people reach out regarding some resources, and I've kind of helped them and connected them, navigated them. Had a couple of people in the Atlanta area reach out, and I was like, "Oh, Counseling Brothers of Atlanta, connect with them." So I'm always willing to connect anyone with any resources that they may be looking for, any thoughts or any concerns, being able to help address those. I'm definitely willing to do my best. If I can't answer the question, I will navigate you to the person that you need to be to get that question answered. So it's been so much fun being here.
No, our pleasure, my pleasure, and well, our pleasure, because folks have been chiming in saying how much they really appreciate this. I mean, I think this is a conversation that we don't often hear, and so getting your perspective and your insight, since you are, counseling these Black men on a daily, and you get to see some sides of them that not even their family members get to see often. So again, kudos to you and thank you for your work, for your service. Just I get so full when I think about you and the work that you do. So I'm grateful for you.
Thank you.
And so just keep up the great work, and if we can support you in some way, let us know. If there's some policy or some initiative that we need to get behind, let us know so that we can help, push forward some of the things that we talked about today.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And, I truly appreciate, the kudos for the work that I do. I always tell people I'm purposed. God positioned me with a purpose. And I don't do this work because it helps me to make a name for myself. I do this work because there are lives that depend on this work. And that's what's rewarding. That's even on my worst day, that's what keeps me going. And that's what keeps me going back. 9 years to go. Now, I'll tell anybody, 9 years to go. I'm on the countdown. 9 years till retirement.
How many months is that?
That would be 72 months.
Okay.
I'm under the 100. Like I was like, once I got under the 120, I was like, woohoo, I done made the halfway mark. I am almost there.
Indeed.
So 9 years to go. And my prayer is that I'm able to touch just as many lives as I've already been able to touch just as many in the next 9 years. But the population's changing. I've seen a shift in the population. And
really?
Oh yeah. We're starting to get to 2,000 babies, which is a different generation. And that's the other issue. That's a conversation for another day, but the prison system hasn't even kept up with the generational changes. And so that's what I'm seeing now is like this generational shift. And so we've got the 2,000 babies starting to come through the door, and the 2,000 babies are different than them 90 babies. And they definitely different than them old 80 babies who are on the back end of their sentences now. So different dynamics that are going on. And I feel like, that's some of the things that again, we just don't keep up with it. We're willing to bring them in front of the court system and put them in prison, but we're not willing to think about all those aspects that come along with, so 9 years to go. Countdown.
Indeed.
Countdown.
All right. Well, we might have to have you come back on and tell us about these 2,000 babies. So,
well, listen, I'm telling you, different breed, but we can have a conversation. That's a generation that is very unique and peculiar, and a lot of trauma. When I tell you lots and lots of trauma, but also very entitled. So, totally different generation than your 80s and your 90s. And even like they're just different. You have to approach them from a different perspective completely.
Gotcha. All right, good deal. Well, I invite those of you who have not subscribed to the Conversations with Nicole YouTube channel to do so. This show will be housed there as well as on Greater Works Network on Roku. So subscribing and supporting, and we need all the support we can get. So next week we are finishing up our focus on Men's Health Month and specifically Black men and their mental health. So we have Ozzy Daniel, who will be with us Monday, talking about Black men and faith, and Dr. B, who is here in Tallahassee. We'll be talking about becoming Baba, paternal perinatal care. So should be an interesting conversation. All right, good people. Well, we want to again just thank you for being here with us. And again, let's keep the conversation going. Thank you again, Dr. Karla. And you all have a great rest of the evening. And we will see y'all next week. Bye.